Sakimura. She was a child during the war who grew up in Austria, and she'll discuss her memoirs of living it during World War II. And as you remember, the Time Man of the Year in about 1939, something like that, was Adolf Hitler. He was an Austrian, so I'm sure there were a lot of things going on in Austria at that time that might be of interest. And finally, the reminder, we do have a helmet committee. There are 2 people who will be standing around after we don't charge for these meetings, but we do collect. It's just to offset our rent and other things. We appreciate your contribution. So, speakers tonight. We have author Martin King, who's a Belgian historian and author. He's a consultant to the History Channel's Greatest Tank Battles, which I just saw within the last month. And I got to tell you, it's something. I never had such an appreciation for, even though my son was in the 1st Army Division. What?
Within the past several weeks, we lost a gracious, lovely lady, Yvonne Cheney of Palmyra, who was one of our 6 founding members of this round table.
I didn't know that.
Yes. She was there at the very first meeting, which was the 1st February in 2003 at Hershey Public Library. And she was wonderful, but what was also great is she herself was an excellent military historian, and she could hold her own as far as World War II military history and also Civil War history with any of the guys. She'll be greatly missed among those who know her.
I see a lot of nodding heads here. We're in agreement. Thank you for telling us that. Anyway, to say again any other announcements? Okay. Martin King, Belgian historian and author, consultant to the History Channel's Greatest Tank Battles, which really was interesting. And Michael Collins, previewing their newest book, The Tigers of Bastogne, the 10th Armored Division. After which we'll have a question and answer period. Please keep them as questions, not as, just keep it brief because they'll have a lot to say. So with that, we give you Martin and Michael.
Now, I want to point out a very important thing. I'm not Belgian. I have nothing against the Belgians. They're lovely. In fact, I even married one. Not for a bet, either. I am from a country that sits behind a Roman wall to the north of England. That does not mean this is going to be an evening with Shrek. Now, I am indeed a Scotsman, proud of it. Apart from being a historical consultant for the History Channel, an author and a professor, just this year I was nominated as a European Cultural Ambassador. I have been getting difficult to live with. And of course it's gone completely to my head. I've insisted my children refer to me as ambassador, and my wife, once she'd stopped hitting me, I was fine. Now, my local town hall where I live in Belgium. I used to lecture in European history at the University of Antwerp, and when I stopped doing that, I began to work for the History Channel. I've been 3 series, Cities of the Underworld, which did very well, British Tank Battles, which is still being seen, and I presented a few episodes of that too, and the latest series, which is called Narrow Escapes. There's going to be a 4th series this summer, and I absolutely adore what I do with a passion. But first things first, the place where I live nominated me to be a European ambassador, and when they did that, they said, well, you seem to travel around quite a lot. I said, yes, I do, I love it. Is there any place where you go to where you could set up some kind of connection with us here in Belgium? I said, yeah, there is, actually. I'm going to a place in Pennsylvania. And the mayor of the town hall came down to me and said he wanted to present this plate to the Capital Area World War II Roundtable Hershey Derry Township Historical Society specialty tours in mutual friendship and respect, and of course deep, deep gratitude for the sacrifice made in World War II. So on behalf of the Town Hall where I live, and on behalf of the people of Roots, Belgium, I'd like to present this plate to this loyal person. Costume designer to smile for photographs.
That's it. That's
Thank you very much. So that's the official stuff. Right. Very welcome, sir.
This will be housed permanently at this. I'll yell in the bell. This will be housed permanently at the Hershey Derry Township Historical Society, that is accepted with great humility. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. It's an honour and a pleasure. Michael Collins.
Well, thank you, first off, to everyone who's here today. I'm also not Shrek either. Margaret and I actually have known each other for about 7 years now. And the reason why we got together to write books is that, well, we both have passions. We have passions to bring veteran stories to the people. Actually, I want to ask this first question. Is there any 10th Armored veterans in the building? Any family members? 10th Armored veterans? Okay. Excellent. Well, just wanted to ask that quick. Yeah. But I'm actually the historian for the 10th Armored Division Veterans Association, the Western Chapter. And to be able to talk with these veterans and to hear their stories is really the reason why we are getting together here to tell you about what their battle in Bastogne was all about.
Tell them where we were yesterday.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, we're at some big, well, they say it's the largest office building in the world. And it's got a very distinct shape. Oh, wait, Pentagon, right? Yes, Pentagon, right, that's the Pentagon, right. Yes, we actually spoke at the Pentagon Library, and we got a personalized tour of, and it was amazing.
It was amazing that we didn't go to Guantanamo.
Yes, right, yes. They did let us get out of the Pentagon, which was good. But we're glad that we're here today to share our passions with you.
So, teamwork. Teamwork. We work together. Mike works from America, I work from Europe. We play tennis with information the whole time, battling to and fro, cross-referencing information. And as Michael quite correctly said, we do it because of our love, passion, and veneration for veterans. That's a be-all and end-all. If we did it for the money, we could give up now. But you have to be passionate about what you do. So Mike finds the veterans in America, interviews them, documents them. He's quite possibly one of the best archivists and researchers I've ever known in my whole life. I have the nefarious and sometimes uncomfortable task of tracking down Nazis. Now, I don't refer here to ex-German soldiers, ex-German army. I occasionally have to go after the SS, who are not the chattiest people in the world. You'll be surprised. Can be very reticent sometimes. Now, in that line of work, I basically am very, very meticulous, but so is Michael. He's got my back the whole time, and I've got his. I'm British, he's American. We look out for each other, we get the job done, we work together. Now, the 10th Armoured Division struck me as a very, very important story. Because, basically, they were overlooked. And if there's something that really gets up my nose and Mike's, it's people not getting credit where credit is due. The 10th Armoured didn't get that credit.
Now, the 10th Armored, they were known as the Tiger Division. And really that's where we got the title for this book, The Tigers of Bastogne. We know that one of the more famous books written about Bastogne was The Battered Bastards of Bastogne. Well, these were the other battered bastards who were there first. Now, 10th Armored veterans, they will tell you, if it wasn't for the 101st, they wouldn't have been able to survive. But they also say that we were there first. And, well, there we go. Just a little plug. But, and also you can see I'm a walking advertisement as well. I was told it was dressed down, so I decided to. But what we're going to be talking about today is giving you a brief glimpse of what these tigers were facing for several hours, all alone, with only one combat command of 2,700 men, facing the last German offensive.
If there was ever a unit that displayed gallantry and tenacity in the face of overwhelming odds, it was these lads, because they really had no idea what they were getting into. They were ordered up to Bastogne on the 17th of December. Now here you can see the situation in Europe, excuse me, in 1944. The Allied line in the west extending all the way from north to south. The problem was cohesion. There was disparity between certain commanders at ETO. They couldn't decide, after D-Day, what are we going to do next? Where are we going to hit them? Some thought it was all over by the shouting. They were very wrong, or to be proven wrong. Patton said in the south, they're going to come through the Alsace. I know it. And he was a pretty cocksure kind of guy who people listened to when he spoke. Monty, who was not his best friend, said, no, they're going to hit in the north. We have to go in through the north. Disparity. Problem is, when neither could agree on the next tactic, they in fact divided, leaving a gap, a very thinly held gap, in an area called the Ardennes.
Now, you only had in the Ardennes 4 divisions. You had the 106th Division, 9th Armored Division, the 4th Infantry Division, and, I think we all know the bloody bucket here, 28th Division. Now, the 28th Division, they, sorry that my mic is a little bit off, and I'll just talk very loud.
Pick up the yellow one. Oh, the yellow one. No, the stand.
Ah, thank you.
Okay, good. The 28th Division, of course, they were sent to the Ardennes for rest and recuperation. They didn't get any rest or recuperation. But if it was not for their tenacity and the 9th Armored in the south, the 10th Armored Division would have had no chance of getting up to that area. But really, the Germans underestimated all of those 4 units who were waiting for them. And that's really what gave the 10th Armored Division, the 101st Airborne, the 82nd Airborne, all of the divisions who came in later, they were not going to make it if the other 4 thinly spread out divisions hadn't held them up.
Absolutely, complete and total respect for the 28th Division. They'd lost 4/5 of the number in the Houtman Forest, commanded by Dutch Coulter, and whom you're probably familiar with. They were sent down to hold another line and to refit. Now, at 5:30 in the morning on the 16th of December, 3 German armies attacked simultaneously. Now, to give you an idea of what that was like, You see, we can only interview the veterans and get their story, their side of the events, and attempt to try to understand what it must have been like for them. Well, in the north, you had the 6th German Army, who were mainly SS. In the centre, you had the 5th Army. They were going to go for Bastogne. And in the south, you had the 7th Army. These 3 armies were going to move in tandem, retake Antwerp, divide the Allies piecemeal, divide their effort, and hopefully roll them up.
Now, also, kind of give you the little makeup of the German command, but to give you an idea of the 10th Armored Division, where they were just south of Luxembourg. They were in what they called Metz, Fortress Metz. That was their baptism of fire. And they really began to get their own rest and recuperation. And they were only in Metz for about a week before really all hell broke loose. And talking with these veterans, they were telling me that we were barely able to get a shower in when we started hearing these different reports that a big offensive was coming. And you can only imagine, here these tankers are who haven't had much experience, and they're literally jumping into their vehicles and just going north, not knowing what's going to be hitting them.
This is a chap who had anger management issues. He was extremely volatile by December 1944, probably because some of his own generals had attempted to assassinate him in July in Stauffenberg, being one of them. And he was convinced that this was the right thing to do, to start an offensive in the west, to divide the Allies piecemeal, because he knew his intelligence was quite good. He knew there was disparity at ETO, between British, Canadian, Polish, American. He knew there was disparity, and he wanted to capitalise on that. Excuse me, and he was going to. This is the man after whom the offensive was named. That was a mistake, because he actually said it was not going to work. He didn't believe it could work. None of the generals believed it could work, but nobody dared tell Hitler. Can you imagine the meeting? This is crap. Tell him with a moustache, he is. There's only one guy who dared to do that. Him, Otto Moritz Walter Mödel. This guy went up to Hitler and said, look, you're doing this all wrong. He'd come from the Eastern Front. He said, what you need to do is make one concerted push to the north of Aachen. That's where the line is weakest. That way we will divide the Allies piecemeal. It'll all be over in months. Nobody agreed with him. And Adolf Hitler called him a defeatist and a coward. This man commanded the 6th Army in the north, Joseph Sepp Dietrich, dyed-in-the-blood Nazi SS man. He'd been with Adolf Hitler in the Munich beer halls. He'd come up through the ranks, and this chap was now commanding the 6th Army, all SS. But by 1944, he had a drink problem. The man was a chronic alcoholic, he couldn't think straight, he couldn't see straight, and he was a sycophant. This chap, Hassel von Manteuffel, Hassel Eckhard von Manteuffel, he was commanding the 5th Army in the centre who were going to attack Bastogne. Manteuffel was a very, very capable general. He'd served under Rommel. He was a determined man, but he was the least equipped of all the 3 generals. Oh, Jesus, this man could not organise a visit to a brewery with a party of Scotsmen. He was hopeless. But you see, this was a situation at the time. They didn't have the best generals to pick from anymore. Rommel was dead, Guderian was back at HQ. They did not have the choice of the best men anymore.
Now, the Allied forces, as we know, of course, Dwight D. Eisenhower was Supreme Commander. You had an interesting mix of people. You had Courtney Hodges, who was up with the 1st Army. Of course, good old George S. Patton with the 3rd Army. But you also had Omar Bradley. Now, Bradley, he and Ike, they were roommates at West Point. Whatever Bradley needed, Ike provided.
We know that Patton and Ike didn't necessarily see eye to eye, but the 21st Army General, Bernard Law Montgomery, Monty, well, he kind of rubbed a lot of the American generals a little bit, especially George Patton. But again, he was involved. And we can just keep going through just some photos. There's Ike.
We're just showing you what they looked like.
It's good to have some good visuals, of course, as the man himself. See?
Took me ages to make it do that.
Now, December 18th, 2 days after the Bulge started, 10th Armored Division, they're starting to move out. They're starting to get up north. They have to go from the Metz area. They're spread out. They're in small little towns, little villages. They have to just pack up and move. Most of the time it was just following the vehicle in front of you and hoping that they know where they're going. None of the 10th Armored GIs knew what was going to happen. They just kept following and kind of asking where are we going here? What happened though is that they split into Combat Command B, which went to Bastogne, Combat Command A, which went to Luxembourg, and then you had Combat Command R, which stayed in Luxembourg City itself. Now what we really cover in the book is Combat Command B. As we said, about 2,700 men are going up to hold the line. And if they don't, well, maybe Adolf Hitler's plan does come true, but they have to go up there and do their job. Now, what happens is that Colonel William Roberts, he gets the arduous task of trying to figure out how are they going to defend Bastogne. Now, Bastogne, it's really a crossroads town in southern Belgium. It's a perfect spot for the Germans to take. So he has to figure out, how are we going to defend this town? So what he does is he takes his Combat Command B and splits it into 3 teams. Yep. Henry Cherry, he's the commander of Team Cherry. He's also the commanding officer of the 3rd Tank Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel. He was a hard-nosed West Pointer. He probably got along very well with George Patton. But he was known to be a stickler of the rules.
No.
Can we go back 3, please? We just gotta get our hands. Sorry. There we go. We've got William Desbrie. This man, he was what we call one of the more green commanders of the teams. He had just been switched over to the 20th Armored Infantry Battalion. They were sent up to Neuville, which was north of Bastogne, and he would face the ultimate test, and we'll talk about that later. Smiling Jim O'Hara. He was the oldest of the 3 team leaders. Ironically, in this photo, he's actually not smiling. But he always... Yes, he kind of has this grin. He always had a grin on. And many of the soldiers never knew if he was actually joking or if he was actually serious when he would talk. Again, we're just giving you a brief kind of outlook of who these main players were.
Right, this is the opposition. Who they're going to be up against. 2,700 men. Bear that number in mind, because what I'm going to tell you next is who was going to be coming against them. The chap on the left here is Heinz Cocotte. He's commanding the 2nd Panzer Division. He's got upwards of 14,000 men, tanks, armour, you name it. He's got it. But this one, he's an old warhorse. He's commanding the Panzer Lehr. Now, the Panzer Lehr is a pure armoured division. They are tooled up and tanked out. They've got everything you need. 2 complete divisions, but there are going to be more coming into the fray. Upwards of around between 35 and 40,000 men eventually. there are 2,700 US soldiers in Bastogne initially. Now this is going to show you, when you get the opportunity to go to Bastogne, how little has actually changed there. Because these photographs are taken from the same perspectives by me and Mike, the ones on the right. This team here, this is one of my favourite acronyms. Team Snafu. Who are they?
Well, I think we all have an idea of what snafu means. Team snafu.
Church, Mike.
Yeah. We're keeping it nice and light.
Okay.
Team snafu. They actually were a group formed right after the 28th Division had returned from Luxembourg through the lines, and also the 9th Armored Division. They still had fighting men. They still had men who had skills. So Colonel Roberts, what he did was he took these men, along with 10th Armored men, and put them together and called them Team Snafu. And what they were the fire brigade. They had one of the toughest jobs of being on call 24/7, trying to fill the gaps. Now, a couple of the veterans that are featured in the book, Zeke Proust, he was actually a tank retriever with the 54th Armored Infantry Battalion. He would actually be able to get all of the jeeps and tanks that were knocked out.
Right, plan of attack, 1st Battalion, 506 PIR, and Team de Sobri. The biggest problem they encountered when they actually arrived in Rouville was the fog and the cold. The fog primarily, you couldn't see 10 yards in front of you. Now imagine the blind terror of a young GI, not knowing where that shell's coming from, hearing it go whizzing past, seeing the bullets go whizzing past, and not knowing how many are actually making that noise. Well, they set up shop. The three main approach roads to Bastogne, there are 7. They assume that the Germans are going to use these 3 approach roads from the direct north, from the south, east, and from direct east. This is on the 19th of December. This is Phil Burge. In this little clip, he talks about General McAuliffe and meeting General McAuliffe. Now then, on the 20th of December, Team de Sobri already have to withdraw because of the pressure being put on them by the attacking 2nd German Panzer Division and the Panzer there.
Now, Team O'Hara, he was on the southeast of Bastogne. He has a very difficult job. He has to protect 2 main towns. You have Wardin, and a little bit off of the map here is Marville. So he had to split up his team into 2 sections. And we have an interesting story about...
Yeah, can I tell that?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
okay. Yeah. We discovered that one of the guys with Team O'Hara was related to a famous Hollywood actor, and was actually an actor himself, a Broadway actor. What relative was he to?
If anyone knows Drew Barrymore, he's actually a great uncle of hers.
Great uncle of Drew Barrymore, yeah. And what happened was they went out in the fog in a jeep. These are the little things for me that make the whole thing very, very colourful. They went out in the fog in the jeep to do some recon, to find out, where the Germans actually were and how many of them would be. So these 2 guys go out in the jeep. A chap called Carigo is driving the jeep, and John Drew Devereux is sitting next to him. When they arrive in the tiny village of Wardin, right there at the top, we're about, let's see, 3 miles from Bastogne here, maximum. They arrive in the village of Wardin, and when the local people see the jeep arriving with the star on the front, Americans, they all start coming out of the cellars, out of the haylofts, and from behind the stone walls, and cheering, waving. And John Drew Devereux, who was never one to turn down an audience, actually stood on the bonnet of his jeep and began to enunciate. He said, You are all going to be safe now. The Americans are here. There is no more need to worry, no more need to be concerned. We will protect you. And the guy sitting next to him is looking up and saying, behave yourself, come on. They drive 50 yards to the east of the village and they run almost bumper to bumper into a Panther tank, which opens up on the Jeep with a heavy caliber machine gun. The ground's being raked up around it was the fastest reverse of a Jeep during the siege of Bastogne. He opens the Jeep into reverse. Mr. Devereux's hanging on for dear life, and they turn around and go exactly down the same route they've just gone out on. The people are still there. John Devereux was heard to shout, "Get out of the way, you morons, the crowds are coming!" That's brilliant. Aye, move on.
Now, just a little south of where John Drew Devereux was making his hasty retreat, Don Nichols was a tanker in a howitzer Sherman tank. Now, as we all know, German tanks were much more powerful and better armored than the good old Sherman. But Don Nichols, he actually was able to knock out a Tiger tank. And Martin was describing the fog. It was the same thing down in Wardan and Marvie with Team O'Hara. Literally, Don Nichols had a duel with a Tiger tank. It was about 600 yards between them, and they just kept firing back and forth, and he was able to knock it out with one round that hit right in front. And this is actually what he drew of his duel right after the war. And you can see right there the tank that's circled, that is the Tiger tank. It was actually in some woods 600 yards away, and they were able to knock it out. So these are the interesting stories from John Drew Devereux enunciating that all the Belgians will be freed to tankers knocking out Tigers.
Now, this was a very precarious situation. 2nd German Panzer Division are attacking, Panzer there are attacking, 26th Volks Grenadier German Division attacking, 27th are coming and starting to attack, and the numbers attacking Bastogne are building. The city became completely surrounded. The teams fell back onto Bastogne. Airborne supporting armoured, armoured supporting airborne, and of course the 420th.
Right. Now the main part of the defense of Bastogne was just in the little town of Saint-Champ, which is just west of Bastogne. The 420th Armoured Field Artillery Battalion was the main thrust. They were able to give support at 360 degrees around the city. If it was not for them, neither the Tigers or the Screaming Eagles would have survived. And by the 23rd, they're running low on ammo. They have maybe 1 to 2 rounds per gun, and it's getting even more difficult.
Thankfully, that was the day that something quite miraculous happened for the GIs in Bastogne. After almost 10 days of dense fog, the skies cleared. When those skies cleared, C-47s could fly over and drop supplies. It was the most accurate airdrop of the whole of World War II. Now, this meant they could go on fighting, but the danger was far from over. They may have been resupplied, re-equipped, but the Germans were going to up the ante. They were going to increase the pressure. Now, on the 24th of Bastogne, as you can see now, the city is completely encircled. Something happens on the 24th of Bastogne, which is incredibly disturbing. The Germans are hammering the city with everything they've got. A once beautiful medieval city is being reduced to rubble. There are bodies everywhere, not just the GIs, there are civilians, there are animals everywhere. And this place is becoming a living hell. The temperature drops to minus 28 Celsius. It's freezing. There is snow and constant shell fire. This absolutely delightful lady here is a dear friend of ours.
Augusta Chewy. How many people have seen Band of Brothers, the miniseries?
Put your hands up.
Okay. I figured we'd get a full house here at hands. She was actually featured in this film. You might not know that. During the Bastogne episode, Renee Lemaire was really the central point of that episode. But they mentioned a woman, a black nurse, that they said was Anna from the Congo. Now, for both of us, we watched it and kind of scratched our head and said, what happened to her? Did she get killed in that bombing? We had read in Charles McDonald's great account.
According to Charles McDonald, she was killed. According to John Toland, she was killed. The problem was she wasn't killed. But she was quite forgotten about after the war. Now, what this woman did was considerably more than her white counterpart. From the 21st of December, she volunteered to work. She was a professional nurse. She was actually just in Bastogne on holiday visiting her father. The siege kicked in, of course. She volunteered to work for the 10th Armored Division as a nurse, to help the main medic there, a chap called John Jack Pryor. Now, not only is she wearing a US Army uniform, she actually volunteered on 2 occasions to go out in a jeep with Jack Pryor to retrieve wounded men under fire. Now, she has a condition, a kind of post-traumatic stress disorder condition, which is known as selective mutism. She didn't talk about her experiences for years, so nobody really knew what she'd done. We had an idea, and we began to do some research on this lady. Again, this book is about giving people credit where credit is due. This woman worked for the 10th Armored Division. She got no credit from anyone. We went to see her, and we sat across from her. She's sitting on the edge of the bed. She's a tiny lady. And she described to us how she went out and dragged GIs with all her strength through the snow. And she said
the snow was bouncing in the air. And of course, we're looking at each other saying, that must be machine gun fire. And so she was out there, all little 4 foot something of her. I mean, she's really short. But she was out there pulling paratroopers and tankers off of the battlefield.
Right, pulling them off the battlefield under fire. And the medic she was working with, a chap called John Jack Pryor, he turned to her when they got back to they actually had a jeep and an M3 half-track to load the wounded onto her. He said to her, you know why that ground was raking up and there was machine gun fire, and you know something else, why those Germans missed you, it's because she's so small. And Augusta turned to him and said, small, yeah. A black face and all this white snow? They're just crap shots, those Germans. So she remained unknown, abandoned, left alone, till we found her and we started a campaign for recognition for her, which took 4 years in total. Eventually, the King of Belgium decided that she did deserve that credit, thanks to the archives in Washington, D.C., and cross-referencing the information, we could actually physically prove what she'd done. On December the 11th, 2011, she was knighted. She's now Lady Augusta of Bastogne. That's work for her.
Jack Pryor. We had just mentioned that he was the one who was so happy to see that there was another nurse, someone else who could help. This is Jack Pryor and Augusta when they met for the last time. It was the 50th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. And Jack Pryor, he was the only surgeon in Bastogne. And if it wasn't for her and for Renee Lemaire, many of those soldiers would not have survived.
Absolutely. On the 24th of December, a 500-pound bomb hit the aid station where they were working. That is what was left. And the reason why they thought Augusta had been killed is because she was actually next door having a glass of champagne to celebrate Christmas. And it's incredible. They'd run out of a lot of medical supplies, but they had an ample supply of very good champagne and cognac. And she was just knocking back a quick one next door. The 500-pound bomb drops and it actually physically blows her through a kitchen wall. And all she does is get some dusts off the rubble and carries on working. This is the situation on Christmas Day. Now, I heard a wonderful story about somebody finding a gramophone and playing while they're sifting through the rubble. This must have been surreal. They're sifting through the rubble, there's a few foot of snow, and it's absolutely freezing cold, and somebody's playing White Christmas by Bing Crosby. How strange is that? But then, Mike.
Finally, relief comes. Now, if you ask any 101st Airborne veteran who fought in Bastogne, they don't want to hear that George Patton came to, well, save them. The 4th Armored Division finally broke the siege, and it was a relief. The amount of tankers, paratroopers, civilians who were wounded were brought immediately out of the city once they could get the road clear. And the siege was finally broken. Bastogne was finally allowed to start a new offensive.
Absolutely, but if you see that arrow there on the left, that's pointing out a thin corridor. They did break the siege, they did get through to Bastogne, that corridor was only 1 mile wide. So that meant that corridor was wide enough to bring supplies in and take wounded out. But the fighting wasn't over, not by a long chalk. Because this Walter Model, who I mentioned in the beginning, who said, what you need to do is all attack at once in one direction. He actually gets his way now. Because what starts happening is not an unusual phenomenon, but the world's media, in the West particularly, British and American, begin to recognise that there's something happening in the Ardennes here which is quite significant. The Stars and Stripes refer to the brave defenders of Bastogne, the Washington Post, Alamo in the Ardennes, Alamo in the Battle of the Bulge, they're calling it now. And if there's one man who understands the value of propaganda, it was that anger management chap with a moustache, Adolf Hitler. He said, all units to Bastogne, we will pulverise them. Send everything you've got to Bastogne. So what happens now? The city's been relieved. It's a slogging match. It's not over.
Now, once the bulge is starting to recede, the Germans are pushing back. The Americans push back as well. The 101st Airborne, though they were dug in, they're now getting out of their foxholes and moving forward. Stan Davis, he was with C Company of the 21st Tank Battalion. He fought with Team O'Hara. He was part of the counterattack to finally push the Germans back to Germany. Mr. Howard Liddick was kind enough to bring Stan Davis's medals and uniform that he received from Mr. Davis. The 10th Armored Division, after Christmas, after they were relieved by the 4th Armored, most of them were sent back down to Metz. Several of them, though, especially the tanks, were sent out with the 101st. Unfortunately for Stan Davis, right when they were attacking, his platoon of tanks were all knocked out, and he was actually left to walk back to Bastogne and then finally catch a ride back. The 10th Armored Division, there was only 2,700 or so of them who fought with the 101st Airborne. It's really the best combination of a fighting force you could think of to protect the great city of Bastogne. And what we've done with this book is that we hopefully shown a new light that would complement a Stephen Ambrose Band of Brothers.
These are some of the veterans that we interviewed along the way. This chap here, Kurt Krittenberger, he's 94 years old now. He was in the 4th 20th Armoured Field Artillery. That's Wicker.
Wayne Wicker. This man is about 90 years old, can't really see too well, but he can tell you every single detail of his story. And he does every time we come to the 10th Armored Reunion in Phoenix. He will get up, grab a microphone, and he will talk. And I love it. It's great. But he was actually wounded really the first 2 days. He actually was wounded and then got out of Bastogne before it was encircled.
This guy was an MP, the 28th Division. His story also starts in Bastogne after the Howden Forest. He was one of the soldiers who was actually in Bastogne when the fighting started. This chap, John Schaffner, was with the 589th Field Artillery Battalion just to the north of Bastogne. Ralph K. Manley, 101st Airborne, the smiliest veteran I've ever interviewed in my life. Now, I've got some evil habits. I like a bottle of whiskey now and again, and I'm quite fond of a cigarette and tobacco, I'm afraid. I like my pipe very much. And this guy told me a wonderful story about the aid station that got hit on Christmas Eve. He said he'd actually just brought his friend into this aid station, and he said to his friend, "I'm just going out for a cigarette. I'll be back in a moment." And when he went out the aid station, unfortunately, this is the Carol's Union, he got hit by a 500-pound bomb. But he said to me with a huge big beaming grin on his face, and they say tobacco's bad for you. The legacy.
Legacy of the 10th Armored Division.
We don't just write books.
No. We also like to put up some historical plaques as well. In 2011, myself and Howard Liddick were kicking around an idea of the 10th Armored turret that's sitting just outside of Bastogne on your way to the Martissan Monument. There was no markings on it. If you didn't know what the 10th Armored was, you wouldn't know what that is. It's just a tank turret. So with Martin's help, we were able to get a plaque put up on December 10th, 2011, and there's finally some recognition of Combat Command B and their sacrifices. And this is the reason why I do this. This is actually my grandfather. He was with the 90th Cavalry, the recon. He was 17 years old when he went in. Supposedly, according to my father, he had a little bit of ADD problem, so he used to like to steal my great-grandfather's car. So I guess being in a tank was kind of natural. He actually passed away in 1975. I was born in 1984, so obviously I didn't get a chance to talk with him. But even though his voice was silent, I've been able to talk to 2 tank drivers who drove the tank he was in, and I've been able to learn what he was like when he was 17 to 21 years old. And to be honest, that's why we do it. We want to get those voices out there because it's important history, and we need to preserve it.
So thank you all very much for your kind attention this evening. We are campaigners. We will campaign. We will keep campaigning. For those whose voices don't get heard, we will try and make them get heard. And we'll keep doing this. We're going to do 3 books about the balls. The 3rd one we're starting on in a few weeks. We'll keep making the films and documentaries about them because we believe it's important for a nation to honour its veterans and respect its veterans. More important, to keep their stories alive and keep listening to them. So, thank you all very much.
Martin, Michael, I get the feeling you might have done this before. This is a well-oiled machine and beautifully done. And again, from our perspective, thank you so much for bringing these stories and these people and their lives back to the future because, it's this kind of effort. It's really amazing. It's what we're all about. So now, I guess I have a question for you. We're going to have some questions and answers, I guess, but my question is, if I recall right, the 10th Armored Division was a fairly young division when they came into Europe. When did they come to Europe, and what did they do before they got to Bastogne?
They came in September of 1944. They had come into Cherbourg. They went down to pretty much the Normandy Peninsula and were able to re-equip and get ready. And they pushed forward in October and arrived in Fortress Metz come November. So they had some experience, but they were literally just getting rest and re-equipping right when the bolt broke. But luckily enough, they had enough equipment to give to the 101st Airborne. Because every veteran I've talked with, and I said, what was it like when the Screaming Eagles came in? And they were telling me these guys were coming out in their regular uniforms. They didn't have boots on. They didn't have weapons. They didn't have helmets. So 10th Armored guys would just load up half-tracks full of weapons and just start throwing them to paratroopers, and they would just run forward. That was another thing. The tankers were just in awe. They would see these paratroopers coming off of these trucks, grabbing a rifle, and just go. And they would just say, wow, you know, this is amazing. But really, the 10th Armored was pretty young. They were very young. But they had great training.
Yeah, so out of the frying pan right into the fire. Just quite remarkable. Anybody else have any questions? I know it was awfully well presented, isn't it? Let me,
How large was Bastogne before the battle? You keep referring to it as a city.
Yeah, well, it is technically a city, but it's not.
Yeah, you know, the actual description, this I found slightly confusing as well. When I read Stephen Ambrose' book, Around the Brothers, when he's referring to the town of Noville. Noville isn't a town, in my perception. Noville is a hamlet. It's 4 houses and a few rather disgusting cows. And there's nothing there hardly. Bastogne wasn't a town, a market town. Now, what you have to bear in mind that most Belgian cities are very, very old indeed, and would have originally been walled cities. The population in 1944 would have been roughly 5,000-6,000, which is a sizable town, and it was all agriculture around there. So, of course, farmland, arable land, and it sits on slightly risen plateau. So, you know, strategically it was important indeed. Any more questions, by the way? I'm not coming back tomorrow, but you get them in there.
is there anybody in this room that was in or around Bastogne at the time? Sometimes we have veterans from those theaters. I guess not tonight, but other questions, comments, remarks?
Yeah.
Okay, hang on a second. That's where I get my PT.
Please do, because I'm slightly deaf.
You cannot.
I served in a very small unit, and I had no idea how big a battalion, a division, or an army is. Can you give us a head count?
Yeah, absolutely. Division in a US Army division in 1944 would have been between 12 and 15,000 men. An army could be upwards of 250,000 to 300,000 with logistical support around 300,000. And to give you an idea of that in a global perspective, when Patton's army and the 3rd Army in the south and the 1st Army in the north actually joined forces on the 11th of January 1945, there are upwards of 500,000 US service personnel in the Ardennes. That's a few more than 2,000.
There's another hand. Steve Morozek.
Great presentation, guys. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
that.
Thank you.
Well done. On the 7 roads that go outside of Bastogne, they mark them with a tank turret, a Sherman turret. Just out of curiosity, I don't know if you know or not, is there a story behind those tanks? Are they just random tank turrets, or is there specifically from different units? Or
Well, the 10th Armored one is one of the few that actually has markings on it. The other tank turrets indicate the 3 roads, the 3 teams that were positioned out there. But I know that I've seen photographs from veterans of multiple tank turrets that were there 40 years ago, and now there's either none or one. So they were supposedly placed out there for indication of the three teams, but they've become very much in disrepair. There's one towards Noville, which actually is getting overgrown with vines and things. So we're actually hoping to get the 10th Armored Turret fixed, because it needs to be sandblasted and repainted. It is slightly rusting, but from what we can gather, they were placed to kind of represent the three teams out with the first part of the defense.
There's another. Yeah. Yes, sir.
In your opinion, was the delay that Team Dieselbray and Noville was essential to keep the second Panzer from crossing the River Meuse?
No, because in fact the second Panzer, they reported after the battle that they didn't know the strength of the unit that was in Noville, as the unit in Noville didn't know the strength of the attacking unit. Now what happens in fact is the unit who came down with them, the 116th, they were actually diverted to the west, and they actually made the furthest penetration in the Bulge, as the 2nd Panzer fought a holding action and then went on the offensive to the northeast of Bastogne. Does that answer your question? If it doesn't, please carry on.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, everybody would wake up in the middle of the night and say, geez, I wish I'd asked this. Has he got anything else to say?
By the way, we do have a website.
And that is?
A Facebook page. And if you look up Voices of the Bulge,
Yes.
which is our first book on the subject, you can see video clips in there, you can see me and Mike in action. We were interviewed, we've had a few interviews over the years, but we were interviewed not so long back on Fox DC, and the dear woman was almost pulling her hair out. She was a little bit distracted by us. You can watch the interviews there on the site.
And if you get a chance to follow the History Channel, to look at the...
Absolutely, you can see the clips.
It'll be repeated many times, and it's just amazing. I was very pleased to have seen that, not even knowing you were coming, so...
Just a little follow-up information. Back in the 50s and 60s, the Army had put out a series of half-hour TV shows. It was called The Big Picture. And commonly, like History Channel runs it, they call it Battleground. 1965, there was a two-part program, half-hour each, on the 10th Armored Division called Tigers on the Loose. Just go onto YouTube, get on the website, put it in a search, Tigers on the Loose, Part 1, Part 2. And you're going to be intrigued to sit there for an hour and watch it on your computer screen, because it is very well done. It was done back in 1965. And the real nice thing about that is because this is 1965, and General McAuliffe actually stood there and said that he always kind of regretted the fact that the 10th Armored Division Combat Command B never got the credit for the actions that they undertook at Bastogne. And very simply, I mean, if it wasn't for Combat Command B at Bastogne, the Panzers would have been in Bastogne saying, hello, 101st, welcome here.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. Appreciate that. Right, so, yeah, we can now...
Okay, anybody else? Last call? Thank you so much.
Thank you.